My name is Eleanor Grace Mitchell. I am 102 years old, and every time I visit a doctor, I see the same expression on their face. First, they look at me. Then they look at my medical records. Then they look back at me again, as if something doesn't quite add up. Because according to many of the rules they've been taught about aging, I shouldn't be doing as well as I am. I still live independently. I still cook my own meals. I still take care of my garden. I still walk every morning. And perhaps most surprisingly, I still wake up excited about the day ahead. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, I'm not saying I've discovered some magical secret that guarantees a long life. I've lived long enough to know that life doesn't work that way. I've seen healthy people pass away too soon. I've seen people with terrible habits somehow reach their 90s. There are no guarantees. But after living through more than a century of change, I have noticed something interesting. The healthiest older people I've known rarely had complicated lives. They weren't chasing every new trend. They weren't constantly changing diets. They weren't searching for the latest miracle supplement. Most of them found a simple routine that worked for them and stayed with it. And that's exactly what I did. For more than 50 years, I have eaten the same 4 foods almost every single day. Not because a doctor told me to, not because I read about it in a book, not because some expert on television convinced me. I eat them because they make me feel good. They keep me satisfied. They give me energy. And after all these years, I've never felt a reason to replace them. The funny thing is that many doctors I've met over the decades were convinced I was doing everything wrong. They warned me. They questioned me. Some even tried very hard to change my mind. Yet here I am at 102 years old, still enjoying those same 4 foods every day. Today, I'm going to tell you exactly what they are. But more importantly, I'm going to share what I believe matters even more than food when it comes to living a long and meaningful life. And I think some of these lessons may surprise you. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. How old are you? And what is one food you've eaten regularly for most of your life? Leave a comment below. I read as many as I can, and I truly enjoy hearing your stories. And if you're interested in healthy aging, longevity habits, and simple life lessons from people who have lived a long time, please subscribe to the channel and join our growing community. Now, let's talk about the first food that has been on my table for decades. The first food is eggs. Not egg whites, not powdered eggs, not one of those liquid egg substitutes that comes in a carton. Real eggs, the whole egg, yolk included. Every single morning, I eat 3 of them. And I've been doing that for longer than many people watching this video have been alive. Now, this is usually the part where doctors start getting nervous, because for decades, people told me eggs were dangerous. Too much cholesterol, they said. Too much fat, they said. You're risking your heart, they said. I remember one doctor back in the late 1970s. Nice man, very confident. He looked at me during a checkup and said, "Eleanor, if you want to live a long life, you need to stop eating so many eggs." He handed me a list of approved breakfast foods: cereal, toast, low-fat yogurt, orange juice. I followed his advice for about a month, and you know what happened. I was hungry all the time. I'd finish breakfast and feel like eating again an hour later. My energy dropped. My mood wasn't as good. I simply didn't feel like myself. So one morning I pushed the cereal aside, cracked 3 eggs into a skillet, and went back to the breakfast I'd been eating most of my life. Within days, I felt better, and I've never stopped since. What always puzzled me was this. People were terrified of eggs, yet nobody seemed concerned about all the highly processed foods filling grocery store shelves. Brightly colored cereals, snack bars with ingredients nobody could pronounce, sugar hidden in everything. But somehow, the egg became the villain. That never made much sense to me. When I look at an egg, I see one of nature's most complete foods. Think about it for a moment. Inside that shell is everything needed to create new life. Protein, healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, all packed into something simple enough that a farmer's family could gather it before breakfast. My mother ate eggs almost every day. My father did too. Most people in my generation grew up eating eggs without giving them a second thought. Nobody called them superfoods. Nobody put them on magazine covers. They were simply food, and maybe that's part of the problem today. We've become so busy searching for the next miracle that we've forgotten to appreciate the basics. Now, am I saying eggs are the reason I'm 102 years old? Of course not. Life is never that simple. But I can tell you this. For more than half a century, eggs have been part of nearly every morning I've lived. They keep me satisfied. They give me steady energy. And after all these years, every time I sit down to breakfast and see those 3 eggs on my plate, I still smile. Because sometimes the foods that stand the test of time are the ones worth paying attention to. The second food is salmon. Not fish sticks, not fish-shaped crackers, not something covered in breading and deep fried until it barely resembles fish at all. I'm talking about real salmon. Simple, fresh when possible, cooked with very little added to it. I've eaten some form of fatty fish almost every day for decades. And if eggs are the food that starts arguments, salmon is usually the food that starts questions. People ask me, Eleanor, why salmon? The answer is simple. Because it's what I grew up with. My father was a fisherman, not the kind you see on television today. Just an ordinary man who worked hard, came home tired, and believed food should come from nature whenever possible. Some of my earliest memories are sitting around a small wooden table while my mother prepared fish that my father had caught. Nobody talked about omega-3 sex back then. Nobody discussed inflammation. Nobody knew what antioxidants were. People simply ate what generations before them had eaten, and they got on with life. Years later, when health experts began talking about the benefits of fish, I remember laughing, not because they were wrong, but because my family had known it without needing a study. The oldest people I knew growing up all ate simple foods from the land and the water. Fish was one of them. One doctor once asked me if I ever got tired of eating the same things. I said, "Do you get tired of breathing?" He laughed. Then I told him something I still believe today. Most people aren't exhausted because they eat the same foods. They're exhausted because they're constantly chasing something new. A new diet, a new supplement, a new promise, a new miracle. Every month there's another expert telling people to completely change what they're eating. At 102 years old, I've watched those trends come and go. But salmon has stayed, and so have I. Now, am I claiming salmon is a magic food? Of course not. There's no such thing. But I do know this. Whenever I eat a simple piece of salmon, I feel nourished, satisfied, strong, not stuffed, not sluggish, just fed, and that's something many modern meals fail to accomplish. Food shouldn't leave you feeling confused. It shouldn't require a chemistry degree to understand the ingredients. Sometimes a meal should simply look like food. A piece of fish, a few vegetables, a potato, a glass of water. Simple. The older I get, the more I appreciate simplicity. Because nature usually gets things right long before we do. And that's exactly why salmon has remained on my plate for so many years. But the third food on my list may surprise you even more. Because for years, people tried to convince me it was something I should avoid. The third food is sweet potatoes. And believe it or not, this is the one that caused the most arguments over the years. Not because it's expensive, not because it's exotic, but because at various times, people decided carbohydrates were the enemy. I can't tell you how many times someone has looked at my plate and said, "Eleanor, you still eat potatoes?" As if I'd confessed to robbing a bank. One doctor in the early 1990s was particularly concerned. He told me carbohydrates were ruining people's health. He suggested I replace my sweet potatoes with more processed low-carb products that were becoming popular at the time. So I gave it a try. For a few weeks, I followed the plan, and honestly, I felt miserable. I was tired. I felt less energetic during my morning walks. I found myself thinking about food all day. Most importantly, I didn't feel like myself. So I went right back to my sweet potatoes, and I've been eating them ever since. You see, sweet potatoes remind me of something important. They remind me of survival. When I was a little girl, life wasn't always easy. There were years when money was tight and luxuries simply didn't exist. But there were always simple foods that helped families get through difficult times. Sweet potatoes were one of them. They were affordable, filling, reliable. You could grow them, store them, share them. Entire generations were nourished by foods like these. Yet, somehow today, many people are afraid of them. I find that fascinating. People aren't afraid of soda. They're not afraid of candy bars. They're not afraid of highly processed snacks filled with ingredients they've never heard of. But a sweet potato? Suddenly everyone becomes concerned. That never made much sense to me. When I look at a sweet potato, I don't see something to fear. I see energy. I see fiber. I see vitamins. I see a food that has helped human beings thrive for generations. And perhaps more importantly, I see simplicity. At 102, I've learned that the human body often responds best to simple things. Simple movement, simple routines, simple food. The older I get, the less interested I become in complicated nutrition theories. I care about what actually works. And for me, sweet potatoes have worked for decades. No tracking apps, no food scales, no complicated calculations. Just a simple food that leaves me feeling satisfied and ready to live my life. That's all I've ever asked from a meal. And speaking of foods that many modern people have forgotten how to appreciate, let's talk about the fourth food. This one may surprise some of you even more than the others. The fourth food is full-fat yogurt. Not the fat-free kind, not the artificially flavored kind with candy pieces mixed into it, and certainly not the kind with more sugar than a slice of cake. I'm talking about plain, full-fat yogurt. Simple, creamy, real. I've eaten it almost every day for more than 40 years. And once again, I've spent decades listening to people tell me I shouldn't. There was a period when fat became the villain. Everything had to be low fat, reduced fat, fat-free. People acted as though a little natural fat in food was somehow more dangerous than all the sugar being added to replace it. I never understood that. One afternoon, many years ago, a nutrition specialist looked at my grocery cart and noticed several containers of full-fat yogurt. She smiled politely and suggested I switch to a fat-free version. Much healthier, she said, so I bought some. I took it home. I tried it, and it tasted like disappointment. I remember sitting at my kitchen table thinking, if this is progress, I think I'll stay in the past. The next week, I went back to buying the yogurt I actually enjoyed. Because here's something I've learned after 102 years. If a food leaves you satisfied, you're less likely to spend the rest of the day looking for snacks. You're less likely to raid the pantry. You're less likely to constantly think about your next meal. Satisfaction matters. And real food tends to satisfy people better than food that's been altered beyond recognition. The older I get, the more I appreciate foods that are close to their natural form. Foods that my grandmother would recognize. Foods that don't require a marketing campaign to convince me they're healthy. My grandmother ate full-fat dairy. My mother ate full-fat dairy. Neither of them spent their days reading labels or calculating percentages. They simply ate real food and lived their lives. And that's something modern society seems to have forgotten. We've become obsessed with numbers, calories, macros, percentages, points, scores, ratings. People spend so much time measuring food that they forget to enjoy it. Meanwhile, some of the healthiest older people I've ever known never tracked a single thing. They ate simple meals. They listened to their bodies, and they stopped eating when they were full. Imagine that. At 102 years old, I still believe common sense deserves a place at the table. Now, before anyone rushes to copy my diet, let me tell you something important. Because the truth is, these four foods are only part of the story. In fact, I believe there's something far more important than eggs, salmon, sweet potatoes, or yogurt. I've seen people eat nearly perfect diets and still become miserable. I've seen people follow every health rule in the book and still lose their joy. And that's because good health isn't built on food alone. The next lesson may be the most important one I've learned in more than a century of living. Now let me tell you something that may surprise you. I don't believe these four foods are the reason I've lived to 102. They're part of the story. But they're not the whole story. Because over the years, I've known people who ate far better than I did. People who followed every health recommendation. People who never missed a workout. People who read every nutrition book that came out. And some of them died decades ago. One man in particular comes to mind. His name was Frank Dawson. Frank lived 3 houses down from me for nearly 20 years. If healthy living were a competition, Frank would have won first place. He walked 5 miles every morning. He never smoked. He rarely drank. He followed every new health trend that appeared in magazines. If a doctor recommended something, Frank did it. If an expert wrote a book, Frank bought it. He was always searching for the next thing that would keep him healthy. But there was one problem. Frank was angry all the time. He carried resentment everywhere he went. He was angry at his former business partner, angry at his brother, angry at the government, angry at the weather. Honestly, I think Frank would have been angry if he had won the lottery. Every conversation somehow found its way back to a grudge he was carrying, and those grudges got heavier every year. I remember sitting on my front porch with him one summer evening. The sun was setting, the birds were singing, the air was perfect. It was one of those moments that reminds you how beautiful life can be, and yet Frank spent the entire evening talking about something that had happened 15 years earlier. 15 years. Can you imagine carrying that kind of burden every single day? A few years later, Frank became seriously ill, and as sad as it sounds, I wasn't surprised. Because long before his body became sick, his spirit already was. Now, I'm not saying negative emotions directly cause disease. Life is more complicated than that. But I do believe something important happens when a person spends decades carrying anger, bitterness, and regret. It drains them. It steals their peace. It robs them of joy. And eventually, it takes a toll. At 102 years old, I've learned that health isn't just about what enters your mouth. It's also about what you allow to live inside your heart. You can eat the perfect diet, take the perfect supplements, exercise every day. But if you're carrying hatred everywhere you go, you're making life much harder than it needs to be. That's why, somewhere along the way, I stopped focusing only on what I was eating and started paying more attention to how I was living. Because the people who seem to age the best usually have something else in common. They have reasons to wake up in the morning. They stay connected to others. They keep moving. And perhaps most importantly, they learn how to let things go. Those habits may not sound as exciting as a miracle diet, but in my experience, they've mattered far more. And that's exactly what I want to talk about next. So what are those habits? After more than a century of living, watching people grow old, and saying goodbye to more friends than I can count, I've noticed something remarkable. The people who stay strong the longest rarely have perfect lives. They aren't the richest. They aren't the most famous. They aren't the luckiest. But they almost always share a few simple habits. The first is having a reason to get out of bed. I know that sounds small, but it isn't. Every morning, I wake up with something to do. Some days it's tending my garden. Some days it's calling my granddaughter. Some days it's helping a neighbor with a small problem. Nothing extraordinary, but it's something. A purpose doesn't have to change the world. It just has to give you a reason to participate in it. I've known people who retired and slowly gave up on life because they no longer felt needed. Their bodies didn't fail first. Their sense of purpose did. The second habit is movement. Not exercise, movement. There's a difference. I never spent hours in a gym. I never trained for marathons. I never counted steps. But I've spent my entire life moving. Walking, gardening, cleaning, carrying groceries, climbing stairs, stretching when my body felt stiff. The human body was designed to move. And when we stop moving, we begin to decline. I once knew a woman named Ruth who reached 99 years old. Someone asked her what exercise program she followed. She laughed and said, "Keeping up with life." That answer has stayed with me ever since. The third habit is staying connected to people. This may be the most overlooked health habit in the world. People need people, not screens, not followers, not likes. Real people. People who know your story. People who notice when you're struggling. People who celebrate your victories and sit beside you during your losses. Some of the loneliest people I've ever met were surrounded by technology, and some of the happiest had very little except meaningful relationships. At my age, I can tell you something with certainty. The moments I remember most aren't meals. They're conversations. They're family dinners. They're birthdays. They're hugs. They're the people I loved and the people who loved me back. And then there's the fourth habit, perhaps the hardest one of all. Learning to let things go. Old disappointments. Old mistakes. Old arguments. Old wounds. When you're young, you think holding on to anger makes you strong. When you're old, you realize it mostly makes you tired. I've carried grudges before. I've replayed arguments in my mind. I've spent nights wishing I could change things that were already long gone, and none of it improved my life. Not once. The day I began forgiving people was the day I started feeling lighter. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. And peace is far more valuable than being right. If you ask me what has helped me reach 102 years old, these habits matter every bit as much as the food on my plate. Maybe more, because food nourishes the body, but purpose, movement, connection, and peace nourish the person. And without those things, even the healthiest diet in the world can feel empty. That lesson became painfully clear when I lost one of my closest friends. And her story is something I think everyone needs to hear. Her name was Dorothy Allen, and for most of her life, she was waiting for retirement, waiting for more money, waiting for the perfect opportunity, waiting for someday. Dorothy and I worked together many years ago. She was one of the kindest women you'd ever meet. Hardworking, generous, always helping others. But she had a habit that worried me. No matter what was happening, she was always postponing her happiness. She dreamed of moving to a small cottage near the ocean. She talked about it constantly. Oh, one day, she'd say, one day I'm going to sit on that porch every morning and watch the sunrise. She wanted to travel. One day, she wanted to learn how to paint. One day, she wanted to spend more time with her family. One day, everything important was scheduled for a future that never seemed to arrive. Year after year, Dorothy kept postponing her life. First, she needed to work a little longer. Then she needed to save a little more money. Then she needed to wait for the right moment. There was always another reason, always another delay. And then one day something happened that nobody expected. Dorothy became seriously ill. Very quickly. Within months, she was gone. She never moved to the ocean. She never learned to paint. She never experienced many of the things she spent decades dreaming about. And that broke my heart. Not because she died. We all die. That's part of the deal. What broke my heart was realizing how much living she had postponed. How many beautiful moments she traded away while waiting for a future that wasn't promised. I thought about Dorothy for a long time after that, and eventually I came to a conclusion. The most dangerous word in the English language might be someday, because someday sounds harmless. Someday sounds hopeful, but sometimes someday becomes never. At 102 years old, I can tell you something with complete certainty. There is no perfect time. There is no moment when everything finally falls into place. Life is happening right now, not next year, not after retirement, not when you lose 20 pounds, not when you have more money, not when conditions are perfect. No, this moment, this day, this conversation. That's why I stopped waiting years ago. If I want to call someone, I call them. If I love someone, I tell them. If I want to spend time with family, I make time. Because the older you get, the more you realize that time is the one thing you can never earn back. Money comes and goes. Possessions come and go. Opportunities come and go. But time only moves in one direction. And every day is a gift that nobody is guaranteed. That realization changed the way I live. It also changed the way I think about my simple diet. Because the real reason I eat the same 4 foods every day isn't what most people think. And that may be the biggest lesson of all. The real reason I eat the same 4 foods every day isn't because I believe they're magical. It's because they give me freedom. Freedom from constant decisions. Freedom from confusion. Freedom from spending half my day wondering what I should eat. When I wake up in the morning, I already know. 3 eggs, some salmon, sweet potatoes, yogurt. Simple, predictable, enough. And because food is simple, my life can focus on things that matter more. My family, my friends, my garden, the people I love, the moments I still get to experience. You see, modern life has convinced people that everything needs to be optimized. Your diet, your sleep, your schedule, your hobbies, your productivity. Everyone is chasing the perfect system, the perfect formula, the perfect life. At 102, I can tell you there is no perfect life. There is only the life you have today. So here's what I hope you take away from my story. Eat real food. Keep moving. Stay connected to people. Forgive whenever you can. Find a reason to get up tomorrow morning and stop waiting for someday, because someday isn't guaranteed. Today is. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you. What is one simple habit that has helped you stay healthy, happy, or hopeful through the years? Leave a comment below and share your story. I read many of them, and I truly enjoy learning from people of all ages. And if you enjoy this conversation, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone you care about. My name is Eleanor Grace Mitchell. I'm 102 years old. I'm still here, still grateful, still learning. And yes, I'm still eating those same 4 foods every single day.